Do you want to help us solve a cold case? We are working with a prominent DNA and genetic genealogy lab to help them solve a case by providing them funding. To help, please check out our channel membership video. There'll be a link to the video at the end of this video. There's also one in the description box and in the pinned comment. The first level of membership includes early access to videos, exclusive emojis, badges, and more. With the second level, you'll get all that plus an exclusive video on a topic you vote for. However, the focus of the membership is to solve a cold case. We'll be posting a video about the case very soon, so please keep an eye out for it. Thank you so much for your time. Without any further delay, here's today's video. Number 3. Oscar Otto Johnson. Batavia is an Illinois city that's about 40 miles west of downtown Chicago. In 1925, it was home to 4,300 people. 33-year-old Henry Jeske, his 32-year-old wife Eva, and his 4-year-old son, Ralph, lived in a farmhouse just outside the city. Henry worked at a local bank as an assistant cashier. In his spare time, he worked on the farm. On December 12, 1925, the family went out Christmas shopping. Then they returned home. Around 10 p.m., 18-year-old Harold Hall, a hired hand who worked and lived at the farm, arrived home. He pulled into the driveway, and in the headlights, he saw the dead body of Henry on the ground. Hall drove to the city and told the police what he had found. The police went to the farmhouse. They found the body of 33-year-old Henry Jeske in the yard. Close to his body was the dead body of 4-year-old Ralph. They both had been shot to death. On the living room floor was the new dead body of 32-year-old Eva. She had been shot twice in the head. There were bruises and scratches on her body. The police believe that the family was outside when they were shot. The killer then dragged Eva into the living room where he tried to violate her sexually, as she was either dead or dying. The living room window was broken. The police believe that the killer broke the window, put his hand in and unlatched the window, opened the window, and climbed through it. The contents of a dresser drawer had been strewn about. The phone line was cut. A few hours later, the Jeske's car was found abandoned 5 miles away in West Chicago, Illinois. There was blood on the inside of the car. The police found a fingerprint on the broken living room window. They found matching fingerprints in the car, so they concluded it was the killer's fingerprints. The police had two theories. The first was that the Jeske family returned home and discovered their house being robbed. The burglar killed the family, then fled in the family's car. Backing up the theory was that there were similar robberies in the area. The homes were all burglarized in the evening when no one was home. The burglar broke a window pane and unlatched the lock on the window or the door. He also cut the home's phone cords. A gun had been found at the crime scene. It had been stolen from a home in Aurora, Illinois, which is less than 7 miles from the crime scene. But there was also evidence to suggest it wasn't a robbery. For example, the shooter didn't take any obvious things like cash and jewelry that were left out in the open. Also, why would a robber drag a dead or dying woman into the house to attempt to rape her? So the police's second theory is that someone went to the family's home and waited for the family and then killed them. It turned out that the family was having problems with an illegal bootleg distillery near their home. Months earlier, a man had been murdered at the distillery. Henry had complained to the authorities about the distillery. Eva did not like being home alone at night because the men who went to the distillery frightened her. After the murders, the police arrested the owner of the distillery. His fingerprints didn't match the killer's fingerprints, so he was cleared as a suspect. Another person in question was Harvey Hall, the hired hand who found the bodies. but he had an alibi for the time of the murders, and the police confirmed his alibi, so he was cleared as a suspect as well. The police made several arrests, but none of their fingerprints matched either, so the case went cold for about 6 weeks. On January 28, 1926, a woman in Joliet, Illinois, saw a man breaking into her neighbor's house across the road from her. She was the wife of a police officer. She called the police, and 2 teams of officers arrived at the home shortly afterward. The police discovered that the burglar had left the home. They followed his footprints in the snow and caught up with the man. When they tried to arrest the man, he opened fire and a gunfight ensued. Over a dozen shots were fired. The burglar was shot in the back. The bullet went through his stomach and came out his chest, just below his heart. He was identified as 51-year-old Oscar Otto Johnson. Johnson was taken to the hospital. Otto Johnson was a carpenter who lived in Joliet. He admitted to the police he had committed hundreds of home robberies in northern Illinois over the past year. He said he often entered the home by breaking a window pane and unlocking the door or window. He then cut the phone line or pulled the phone out of the wall. Since this is what happened at the Juskis' home, Johnson was questioned about their murders. He refused to talk about the murders and claimed he was not in the area when the Juskis were killed. Just before Johnson was going to have an operation, he was told there was a good chance he would not survive. He was asked again about the murder of the Juski family. Johnson said, quote, "If I don't come out, it's all right. I'm going to hell anyway. I'm not going to tell anything," unquote. Johnson went for the operation, but the surgeons couldn't do anything to help him. He was told he only had a few hours to live. About 12 hours after Johnson was shot, he was lying in a hospital bed with a police officer standing guard. He told the officer more about his life. In January 1925, a year earlier, he was released from the Matawan State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Matawan, New York. He said that after he was discharged, he had killed a man in New York, but he did not give much detail about this murder. He then moved to Joliet. During the day, he worked as a carpenter and burglarized homes at night. On the day the Juskis were murdered, he was working on farms near the family's home. He broke into their home to rob them. Then the family surprised him when they arrived home. He said that when he robbed houses, he kept 2 guns on him. He said that he shot Henry first, then Eva, and finally Ralph. He denied trying to do anything sexual with Eva's body. Besides claiming he didn't do anything to Eva besides shoot her, all the other details he gave matched the description of what happened. About 80 minutes after confessing, 51-year-old Otto Oscar Johnson died from his injuries. After the deathbed confession, the police considered the murder of the Juski family closed. Number 2. Earl Storm. In the spring of 1991, John and Yvonne Cook had been married for over 25 years. They had 2 grown children. John managed an auto parts plant, and Yvonne was a school secretary. On March 22, 1991, 48-year-old John and Yvonne left their home in Wausau, Wisconsin for a road trip to Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a 1,000-mile trip, and according to Google Maps, it would have taken them about 16 hours. They drove through the night. Just after 5 a.m. on March 23, 1991, they were on Interstate 275 in Knoxville, Tennessee. John was driving and Yvonne was asleep between the 2 front captain chairs in the van. John decided to pull over near an on-ramp to check a road map. Suddenly, Yvonne heard 2 loud bangs. Then her husband slumped towards her. A man forced his way into the driver's seat and pushed John to the floor with Yvonne. Yvonne realized that her 48-year-old husband had been shot twice in the head. Yvonne used her fingers to try to stem the bleeding. A young man with a bandana on his head got into the driver's seat and started driving. He had a rifle across his lap. Yvonne begged the shooter to let her get help for her husband. He told her to shut up because her husband was already dead. They drove for about 15 or 20 minutes, and Yvonne held John. She felt when his heart stopped beating. The killer pulled onto a rural road and then stopped the van. He demanded money from Yvonne, and she gave him several $100s. He then got out of the van and ordered Yvonne to get out as well. He pulled John's dead body out of the van. He then ordered Yvonne to get onto her knees. He told her he wasn't going to let her identify him, so he'd end up in prison. He then tried to load his .22 caliber rifle. He was wearing black leather gloves, and he had problems getting the bullets into the rifle. Then a car pulled up on them, and the man abandoned his plans to shoot her. He got into the van and drove away. The authorities were alerted. It was too late to help 48-year-old John Cook. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Yvonne saw the killer's face, but she had problems describing him. She said he was a young white man wearing a bandana. She said it looked like he hadn't even started shaving yet. He was slender and had sharp features. The police believe that John was a victim of a perpetrator they called the I-75 sniper. The police believe the man was responsible for at least 2 other attacks. About a month and a half earlier, on February 3, 1991, a young couple was driving on Interstate 275 in Knoxville around 1 a.m. The woman passenger was shot in the arm. The husband pulled over and parked the car. The shooter walked up to the vehicle and fired a second shot. It grazed her face, and bullet fragments went into her husband's face. They sought help, and both of them survived. The second attack happened the same morning John was killed. At the same exit where the couple was shot, a firefighter's pickup truck was shot at least 5 times. He was uninjured in the shooting. John Cook was shot 10 minutes later and about 3 miles from where the firefighter's truck was shot up. The police suspected that the sniper had an accomplice who worked as a driver. This allowed him to travel to the second location to shoot John. After the murder of her husband, Yvonne went back to Wisconsin. She then started to see a psychiatrist. She was frustrated that she didn't have a better memory of her husband's killer's face. The psychiatrist suggested that hypnosis may help her. Yvonne then saw a hypnotist. The hypnotist said that Yvonne, quote, had developed a mental block in recalling details of the assailant's face, unquote. She underwent 4 hypnosis sessions. On October 11, 1991, about half a year after the murder, Yvonne met with a police sketch artist. She described a man who was between 16 and 22 years old, with sharp features, clean-shaven, a long nose, hollow cheeks, a thin upper lip, and dirty blonde hair under his bandana. The police also sent Yvonne 6 photo lineups, each containing 6 pictures. She did not see the man who killed her husband. Also, with a detective, she viewed several video lineups. In one of them, she saw a man whose body language reminded her of her husband's killer. She requested an audio recording of his voice, but never got one. 9 years went by, and no progress was made on the case. Then in April 2000, the police got a lead. A woman named Mary Storm called the police and said she had been with her 68-year-old brother, Earl Storm, while he was on his deathbed. He told her he knew 2 people who were connected to the murder of John Cook. They were his stepson, Ernest Saylor, and his friend, Howard Walter Thomas, who went by Wally. In none of the news reports or the court filings could we find exactly what Earl Storm said, other than that he said that Ernest and Thomas were connected to the murder. The detectives followed up on the deathbed confession. They located Ernest Saylor, who lived in Knoxville. Besides interviewing him, they also interviewed his mother, Joy Storm, his sister, Sammy Saylor, his grandmother, Goldie Storm, and the woman he was married to at the time, Loretta Strange. Strange had also dated Wally Thomas. Ernest told the police that he and Wally had been best friends and his closest brothers since they were about 14 or 15 years old. Ernest said that on the morning of the murder, Thomas called him and asked him to pick him up at a local car wash. When Ernest picked up Thomas, he noticed that Thomas was wearing a bandana. Thomas's clothes had blood on them. He was carrying something long that was wrapped up in a blanket or bed sheet. It was a rifle. Ernest claimed that Thomas then told him he had killed someone. They went to Ernest's home, where they had his mother, Joyce, clean Thomas's clothes. Then they went to Ernest's grandmother's home, where they hid the gun. That night, Ernest told his mother that Thomas had killed someone, and the murder weapon was at his grandmother's home. They retrieved the gun 2 to 3 days later, and Ernest said he never saw it again. Ernest's mother, Joy Storm, verified the story. She said that Thomas's clothes had blood on them. She was told Thomas had been in a fight. She said that later that day, she noticed that Thomas and Ernest were acting unusual. She then saw news reports about John Cook's murder, and she became suspicious. She pressed her son Ernest to tell the truth. Ernest then told her that Thomas had murdered someone. He told her that the gun was at his grandmother's home. Joyce told her son to get the gun because she didn't want to involve her mother, Goldie Storm. Joyce put Thomas's clothes in a bag and then asked Ernest to give them to Goldie to burn them when she burned her garbage. When Ernest retrieved the gun from his grandmother's home, he gave his grandmother the bag with the clothes in it. Ernest's grandmother, Goldie Storm, confirmed that the gun had been stored at her home, and she burned the bag with the clothes in it. Ernest's sister, Sammy Saylor, said that Thomas gave her money to buy something for her son. She said there was red on it that looked like blood. Loretta Strange said that at the time of the murder, she was dating Thomas. She said about 2 weeks after the murder, Thomas confessed to the shooting. Later that year, she was with Thomas in the area where the shooting happened, and he told her about the murder again. Strange said that 4 or 5 years later, Thomas referenced the murder again. At the time, Thomas was having problems with his ex-wife, and Strange was having issues with one of her ex-husbands. Thomas said that he had killed before, and he would do it again if he had to. Both Ernest and Loretta Strange said that after the murder, Thomas dyed his hair black. That night, after talking to Ernest Saylor and his family, 29-year-old Wally Thomas was arrested and charged with murder. The newspaper, the Knoxville News-Sentinel, published a story about the arrest. It included a photo of John, and below it was a picture of Thomas, showing how he looked at the time of his arrest. A friend of Yvonne Cook, who lived in Knoxville, sent her the article. When Yvonne saw the photograph of Thomas, she was sure he was the man who had killed her husband. On April 28, 2003, Wally Thomas's trial began. The first person who testified was Yvonne Cook. She was shown a picture of what Thomas looked like in 1990, the year before the murder. She confirmed it was the man who had shot her husband. During her testimony, she looked at Thomas and said, quote, "You are the person that murdered my husband," unquote. Ernest Saylor, his mother Joyce Storm, his grandmother Goldie Storm, his sister Sammy Saylor, and his now ex-wife Loretta Strange, who was also Thomas's ex-girlfriend, also testified. They repeated what they had told the police 3 years earlier. Thomas's lawyers argued there was no physical evidence that connected Thomas to the murder. Besides Yvonne Cook, everyone else was connected to Ernest Saylor. Both Ernest and Thomas were suspects in the case after the deathbed confession. Then Ernest's mother, sister, grandmother, and the woman who was his wife at the time all implicated Thomas in the murder. Thomas was arrested, and Ernest was never charged. Thomas's lawyer said they all had a reason to lie and blame Thomas. That was because they were protecting Ernest. The most powerful testimony was from Yvonne Cook. Thomas's lawyer pointed out that Yvonne only saw the killer's profile and never saw him straight on. She also pointed out that in July 1992, she saw a video lineup and one of the men reminded her of the killer. She saw his profile and thought that his body language was the same. She asked for a recording of his voice, but never received it. The man in the lineup was not Wally Thomas. The trial lasted 6 days, and then the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Wally Thomas was found guilty of murder. Thomas could have received the death penalty, but Yvonne asked the jury not to recommend the death penalty. She said the death penalty was too easy for him. She said, quote, "His future should hold only day after day of hopeless confinement in a prison cell," unquote. The prosecution then said they would not be seeking the death penalty. Thomas was sentenced to 25 years to life with a chance of parole after 33 years. Wally Thomas's lawyers appealed the verdict in March 2005. They had major problems with the case. For example, during the trial, Yvonne was shown a photo of Thomas in 1990, which was a year before the murder. In the photo, he had no facial hair and his hair was brown. This is similar to her description of the killer. But the police had a second photo of Thomas that was taken 3 weeks before the murder. In that photo, he has facial hair and his hair is black. Understandably, Yvonne Cook desperately wanted to have someone arrested for the murder of her husband. She saw a hypnotist 4 times and then described the killer to the sketch artist. Thomas did not look much like the sketch. She said that the shooter had sharp features, a long nose, and hollow cheeks. Thomas's features are not sharp, his chin is rounded, and he has a fuller face. His nose is also bulbous and not long. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, Yvonne had problems recalling the face of her husband's killer. But then, 9 years after the murder, she identified Thomas as the killer after seeing his photo in an article about his arrest for her husband's murder. Also, the photo in the newspaper was taken in 2000 when Thomas was 29. Thomas was 20 when the murder was committed. How could Yvonne be so sure that he was the killer after all that time? Or did she believe he was the killer because she so badly wanted closure on her husband's murder? The problem is that human memory is malleable. During stressful situations, many people have problems remembering details. Time can also distort our memories. Something else that can affect our memory is hypnosis. Yvonne underwent hypnosis 4 times to try to remember the details about the killer's face. When Thomas went to trial in Tennessee, lawyers could not have experts testify about memory and eyewitness accounts. Reason being was that they thought lawyers could unfairly use them to discredit all eyewitness testimony. The law was changed in 2007, and now experts can testify about the science of memory and eyewitness accounts. Unfortunately, eyewitness misidentification is a major contributor to wrongful convictions. According to the Innocence Project, quote, "More than 60% of our clients were wrongly convicted based on eyewitness misidentification," unquote. In 2009, Wally Thomas's appeal was denied. His lawyers appealed again in March 2013. The The appeal was ultimately denied. At the time of this video, 53-year-old Wally Thomas is serving a sentence at the Morgan County Correctional Complex in Wartburg, Tennessee. Thomas is eligible for parole in April 2032 when he'll be 61 years old. Number 1. Garry Artman. Grand Rapids is in western Michigan, and in the mid-1990s, it had a population of over 190,000. In the summer of 1993, 29-year-old Linda McHugh lived in Grand Rapids. She was a single mother of a baby girl. Unfortunately, in her early teens, she started abusing alcohol. In the summer of 1993, like all the victims in the century, McHugh was addicted to drugs. Specifically, McHugh abused crack cocaine. Also, like most of the victims in the century, she was in the sex trade. On the night of December 12, 1993, McHugh went out with some friends. She called her boyfriend from a payphone between 3 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. She asked if he could pick her up at a party store in Grand Rapids. Wyoming is about 5 miles from Grand Rapids. He drove to the store, but she wasn't there. 29-year-old Lori McHugh has never been seen or heard from again. 3 weeks later, on January 2, 1994, 23-year-old Lisa Otberg was working on Division Avenue in Grand Rapids. An area in Grand Rapids, Division Avenue, was a popular place for sex workers to look for clients. Otberg was last seen alive getting into a car that stopped on Division Avenue. Lisa Otberg's new dead body was found 3 months later in a bush in Muskegon, Michigan. Muskegon is about 40 miles northwest of Grand Rapids. She had been strangled to death. 8 months later, on November 6, 1994, hunters found some human remains in a ditch west of Grand Rapids. The pathologist believes she was killed months earlier, in the spring or summer of 1994. Because of the state of the remains, the pathologist could not determine the cause of death. The police were unable to identify the body. The Jane Doe got the nickname Matilda. For almost 28 years, Matilda remained unidentified. Then, in 2022, thanks to genetic genealogy, she was identified. She was Shelley Ray Christian from Minnesota. Her family last saw her a year before her body was found. She was 29 years old at the time. When Christian was a teenager, she underwent multiple knee surgeries. She then became addicted to painkillers and later turned to heroin. Her family does not know why she was in the Grand Rapids area. They think it's possible she was doing sex work. Found near her body were blue high-heeled shoes. Her family said she only wore high heels when she went out because she wasn't steady on them. So they think she might have worn them while doing sex work. About 2 months after Shelley Christian's remains were found, on January 18, 1995, at 3 a.m., 37-year-old Robin Sue Scott left her Grand Rapids home. She was last seen working on Division Avenue. Robin Scott, the mother of a teenage son, never returned home, and she has not been seen since. 33-year-old Pamela Lynn Verrill was the mother of 3. On June 2, 1995, her body was found on the banks of the Grand River in Walker, Michigan, which is about 6.5 miles northwest of Grand Rapids. She had been beaten with a blunt object. She was last seen a few hours earlier at a convenience store on Division Avenue. On June 15, 1995, less than 2 weeks after Verrill's murder, 26-year-old Fonda Lockridge vanished. She was the mother of 2. She was last seen walking to a party store in Grand Rapids. It was a different party store than the one the first victim, Lori McHugh, went missing from. Lockridge was never seen or heard from again. On July 10, 1995, 28-year-old Kathleen Dennis and her sister went to a nightclub in Grand Rapids. The sisters were from Omaha, Nebraska. They needed money to support their families, so they turned to sex work. But they did not want to do it in their hometown. So they traveled over 600 miles to Grand Rapids, where they got hotel rooms. They had only been in Grand Rapids for a few days. After the nightclub, the sisters went to Division Avenue and worked on opposite sides of the road. Dennis was last seen getting into an old white Chevy. The model was possibly 1965 to 1968. 28-year-old Kathleen Dennis was never seen again. 3 months went by. Then, on October 19, 1995, the dead body of a woman was found in a wooded area in Muskegon. She had been strangled to death. She was identified as 37-year-old Gail Annette Cook. Cook was last seen alive 2 weeks earlier when she escaped from a work release center in Grand Rapids. Cook is the only woman in the century who did not have a history of sex work, but she was involved in the drug scene. When she escaped from the work release center, she was serving a 1.5-year to 20-year sentence for selling heroin. A month after Cook's body was found, on November 21, 1995, another body was found. The body had been dumped in a creek in Grand Rapids. She was identified as 25-year-old Dawn Marie Shaver. She had been strangled and beaten to death with a blunt object. She had trauma injuries on her neck, chest, and abdomen. It's unknown when and where Shaver was last seen alive. 26-year-old Dawn Charlene Phillips was a married mother of 2. On January 19, 1996, she was working on Division Avenue. Her body was found 10 months later in a wooded area in Grand Rapids. The cause of death could not be determined. On April 27, 1996, 36-year-old Michelle Ann Becker was working on Division Avenue. Months later, on August 9, 1996, her body was found in a wooded area. The pathologist could not determine how she was killed. August 1, 1996 was the last confirmed sighting of 29-year-old Victoria Moore. A month later, on September 11, 1996, her family reported her missing. Her body was found in a rural area in Grand Rapids on October 27, 1996. If the pathologist was able to determine the cause of death, they never made it public. On August 9, 1996, Sherry Stewart Brown celebrated her 33rd birthday. Brown was the mother of 2 sons. Because of her lifestyle, the boys lived with their parents. Brown's parents brought her sons and a peach cobbler to her apartment for her birthday. Sometime after that, Brown went missing. In 2002, it was announced that Brown's remains had been found 4 years earlier, and they just had been identified. Her skeletal remains were found in a rural area in Walker in July 1998, 2 years after she went missing. There were no pieces of identification with her remains, so she was identified by DNA. Because of the state of the remains, the pathologist couldn't nail down a cause of death. Cheryl Lynn Mason was a 39-year-old mother of 6. She didn't have custody of her children because of her lifestyle. Her parents had custody of 2 of her children. On October 22, 1996, Mason's mother reported her missing after she missed one of her daughter's birthdays. Her mother told the police she had not seen her in about 2 months. It turned out that 9 days before Mason's mother reported her missing, her body was found in some brush behind a Grand Rapids business. Before the call, the police had been unable to identify her. The cause of death was not determined. On September 21, 1996, 27-year-old Sonia Marie Campos vanished. She was last seen getting into a van on Division Avenue. Her body was found 2.5 weeks later in Grand Rapids by someone looking for mushrooms. The cause of death could not be determined. On October 3, 1996, 29-year-old mother of two, Sharon Hammack, was reported missing. Hammack was pregnant. Later that day, her body was found in Caledonia, Michigan, which is about 20 miles southeast of Grand Rapids. It was wrapped in a blanket and tied with electrical cords. She had been hogtied and sexually assaulted. She had been stabbed twice in the head and strangled. On July 31, 1997, some skeletal remains of a woman were found in some brush in a park about 5 miles east of Grand Rapids. The cause of death could not be determined, but it's believed she had been killed a year earlier. She was not identified for 2.5 decades. In 2022, with the help of genetic genealogy, she was identified as Stephanie Renee Judson, a mother of two. She was about 30 years old when she was killed. Judson was originally from Benton Harbor, Michigan, which is about 80 miles southwest of Grand Rapids. Her family said she got mixed up with the wrong crowd and started doing drugs and sex work. There was growing concern about the women who were murdered or went missing. Between December 1993 and October 1996, 17 women were murdered or disappeared in the Grand Rapids area. 13 bodies were found and 4 women remain missing. All the women were involved in the sex trade except one, Gail Annette Cook, who was killed after escaping a prison work release program. However, all of them used drugs. Many of the women were last seen on Division Avenue in Grand Rapids. Some people believe that the police weren't doing enough to investigate because the victims were drug-addicted sex workers. This bothered the friends and family of the victims. In 2023, Sarah Brockmiller, Pamela Lynn Varel's daughter, said, quote, "I don't want her to be another number. To me, she wasn't just some prostitute or drug addict. Those were her life choices, but that didn't make her who she was. It didn't define her as a person. She was still a very good person. People loved her. People either wanted to be her or know her or be with her," unquote. In October 1996, a month when 4 bodies were found, a task force was started to investigate the murders. The FBI aided in the investigation. The FBI did not believe that one killer was responsible for all the murders. They thought one person may have committed some of the murders, or several people committed several murders, but not all the murders were committed by one person. They said there were just too many differences in the murders. Not even the family members, the victims, believe all the murders were connected. The daughter of Pamela Lynn Varel does not believe her mother's murder was connected to the other murders. She thinks her mother was killed because she was a drug informant. She was killed on the day she planned to quit being an informant. The task force was disbanded in the spring of 1997 without making any arrests in the cases. Over the years, different task forces were started, but the cases remained unsolved. In 2004, the case of 29-year-old Sharon Hammack, who was raped, strangled, and stabbed to death in October 1993, was reopened. It's believed she was the last of the 17 women to be killed. A DNA profile was created, and in 2009, they found a match. Not to a suspect, but to another unsolved murder. In early 2006, 25-year-old Dusty Shuck was court-ordered to check into a behavioral health facility in Tucson, Arizona. She had schizophrenia and a history of drug abuse. She had been arrested on suspicion of trespassing, disorderly conduct, and weapons misconduct. But she snuck out of the facility before checking in. Months later, in April 2006, she was arrested in Ontario, California. She was arrested again a week later, thousands of miles away from Ontario, near Hinsdale, Illinois. It's not clear what she was arrested for, but she was an unhoused woman with schizophrenia, so it's unsurprising she attracted the attention of the police. On May 4, 2006, 24-year-old Dusty Shuck, who was the mother of 4, was found dead at a rest stop near Frederick, Maryland. She had been raped, beaten in the head, stabbed multiple times, and her throat was slit. However, the identity of the killer still eluded the police. Then, on August 19, 2022, the police announced that, thanks to genetic genealogy, they had made an arrest in the murder of Sharon Hammock. The police said that it had been narrowed down to a set of 4 brothers. Only one of them lived in Grand Rapids. That brother also had a history of sexual violence. He was 64-year-old Garry Artman, who worked as a long-haul truck driver. Artman was born in December 1957 in Port Huron, Michigan, which is about 180 miles east of Grand Rapids. Months after his birth, his father filed for divorce from his mother, citing acts of cruelty as the reason for the divorce. His father was granted custody of his 3 older siblings, but his mother had custody of him since he was still a baby. But according to Wood TV, it's unknown if the couple actually split up. After graduating high school in June 1976, Artman joined the U.S. Marine Corps. In December 1979, Artman, who was 22, was arrested for sexually assaulting a woman at knife point. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail and 2 years of probation. On October 4, 1980, he kidnapped and raped 2 teenage girls. He was arrested less than a week later. In December 1980, while out on bond, he raped a 17-year-old girl. In August 1981, Artman was sentenced to 8 to 15 years in prison for the October 1980 rapes. He served nearly 11 years and was released in July 1992. He then settled in Grand Rapids, Michigan. A year and a half later, Lori McHugh, the first victim, went missing. Over the years, Artman had a few other brushes with the law. He was arrested 3 times between May 1996 and October 1997 for passing bad checks. Artman was problematic at work. He was described as unruly and violent. If he didn't get the jobs he wanted, he yelled, swore, threw things, and threatened to get revenge. In December 1996, he threatened his boss with a sword. In May 1997, Artman's boss was concerned about him and asked the police to document his threatening behavior at work. After Artman was arrested in August 2022 for the murder of Sharon Hammock, the police did not say if he was a suspect in the other murders. In 2018, Artman moved from Grand Rapids to Florida. The police searched a storage unit he rented in Florida, and they found women's underwear. It also turned out that in October 1996, 3 weeks after Hammock's murder, the police had gotten a tip that Artman may have been the killer. They interviewed Artman in March 1997. He admitted that he hired sex workers between June 1992 and November 1996 in Grand Rapids, but denied knowing any of the victims. He didn't make much of an impression on the detective who interviewed him, and he was never considered a person of interest. Garry Artman went to trial for the murder of 25-year-old Sharon Hammock in September 2023. The main evidence against him was the DNA. He also lived close to where Hammock was last seen alive. Also, her body was dumped close to the office of his trucking company. The jury deliberated for 30 minutes. Garry Artman was found guilty of the murder 28 years after it was committed. At Artman's sentencing hearing, he claimed he was innocent. Nevertheless, he was sentenced to life in prison. But that wouldn't be for very long. At the trial, Artman was dying of lung cancer. 3 months after he was sentenced, in December 2023, Artman was in a coma and using a respirator. He was expected to die mid-December 2023. But then he surprised everyone by waking up. Artman said they wanted to talk to the police about, quote, bodies, unquote. In exchange for a confession, he wanted his own cell and a sandwich from Subway. He wanted ham with double meat. Artman met with the police 3 times. Days after he came out of his coma, on December 28, 2023, Garry Artman died. He was 66 years old. The police said that on his deathbed, he admitted to 11 murders. This included the homicide he was convicted of, 29-year-old Sharon Hammock's murder. He also confessed to killing 24-year-old Dusty Shuck in Maryland. His DNA was found on the victim. The police did not release much information about the other 9 murders he confessed to, but the women were killed in the Grand Rapids area. However, they did identify one probable victim of Artman. That was the 7th victim, 28-year-old Kathleen Dennis. She and her sister had come from Omaha to Grand Rapids to work in the sex trade. Dennis's remains have never been found. It's been nearly a year since Garry Artman confessed on his deathbed, and the police have not publicly revealed if they have officially connected him to any other murders. The police do have suspects in some of the other cases. One of them is a man named Jamal Lacey. He was a violent pimp who knew at least 6 of the women, but he claimed he didn't kill them. In December 1996, he was arrested for raping and choking 2 women. They both survived. In 1997, after Lacey was convicted of the attacks, he was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. The police noted that after he was arrested, the murders stopped. In the mid-1990s, Jamal Lacey was considered lead suspect in some of the murders. Another suspect was discovered in 2004 when detectives were investigating Sharon Hammock's murder. He was a human trafficker and pimp named Gregory Kelly, who was described as violent and dangerous. In 2005, Kelly was sentenced to 15 to 40 years of prison for human trafficking. Kelly died in prison in 2020 of complications from COVID-19. He was 58 years old. Kelly knew several of the victims. Notably, he was the man who got Stephanie Judson to move from Benton Harbor to Grand Rapids. Judson was identified 2 years after Kelly's death, so Gregory Kelly is considered a suspect in her case. The police have also eliminated Garry Artman in one of the cases. That is the murder of 33-year-old Pamela Lynn Varell, who was beaten to death in June 1995. Varell's daughter believes she was killed because she was a drug informant. DNA evidence was found at the crime scene, and it did not belong to Garry Artman. The police told Varell's daughter that they would send the DNA for genetic genealogy. At the time of this writing, Varell's murder is still unsolved. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our channel membership for details about how you could help solve a cold case. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.